Good day and welcome to a happy Friday here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm with you live from Remarkable House as Kevin Eikenberry, the host of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You see that up above my shoulder, and we're going to get to that in a second. But if you're with us live, I'm so glad you're here. And if you're with us, I know some of you are listening or watching this later. You're not watching me actually live, but if you're actually here with me live, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to type in whichever social media chat platform you're on right now in the comments. Say hello. Tell us where you're located, because that's a wonderful thing for me to know. But beyond that, it also gets you involved, which is what I want you to do throughout. In fact, whether you're live or whether you're with us later, I'm going to give you a chance to win a copy of this book, which is the book we're going to be talking about today. More about that in a second. So you'll have a chance to win the book if you are within the sound of my voice right now. So the way to do that is to go connect with me. You see my name right down there on LinkedIn and say, Kevin, I was on your podcast and I want a copy of the book. And I haven't done a giveaway in a long time. We're doing it today. So you will be entered into a drawing for that if you do that. Okay. And the other reason that I really hope that I'm going to do a drawing, but let me just say, if you comment, whether it's live or later, it's going to improve your odds. Let's just say that. But the other reason I want you to comment is that if we were having a conversation around a table, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you'd offer it, right? Like naturally, that's what would happen. But you're not at the same table with me. In fact, I'm not even at the same table as my guest either. We're all virtual. But you can still do those things. You can ask your questions, share your comments, offer your ideas. And when you do that, you'll get more from this conversation. We'll have a better conversation, and eventually it will make a better podcast, which is, of course, at the end of the day, the biggest reason why we're here. Again, you see it over my corner, over the corner of my shoulder. The Remarkable Leadership Podcast is the ultimate home of this content. So let me do this. I'm going to do a countdown and we'll do the live open for the podcast, and we will dive in and you will start typing anytime now, right? Okay, here we go. Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. In case you didn't know it, you deceive yourself. There are plenty of reasons it happens. And when we do it as a leader, it can create plenty of problems. Today, we're talking with an expert, part of a team that created the latest edition of the longtime best-selling book on this subject. Stick around and you will learn some things about yourself, how to become a better leader, and as I already said, perhaps win a copy of this book. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, their organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future for live episodes, because all of them are live streamed before they are put on the podcast stream. And so if you want to find out when those are happening so you can get involved, I'd highly encourage that. And the way to do that is to join either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, where you can get all of that info on a regular basis. That's not the only two places that the show is live, but it is two of those places. You can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn more. Get signed up there, find out when we're doing these live so you can join us then. I hope you'll do that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the second edition of our new book, The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. If you lead a team that is distributed in any way, this book will give you the new skills, insights, and confidence you need to lead more effectively in this new and ever-changing world of work. You can learn more and order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/LDL. And when you do that, remarkablepodcast.com/LDL, you get some special gifts just for ordering your copy now. Hope you'll do all of that. Now, without any further ado, let me bring in my guest. Here she is. Her name is Victoria Trammel. She said it's Trammel, Kevin, not a fancier way of saying it. So here we go. Victoria Trammel is a seasoned facilitator and leadership consultant who brings almost 2 decades of experience supporting the intelligence community to her work with Arbinger. Her expertise in strategic planning, employee engagement, and leadership development and process improvement were sharpened in the fast-paced and ever-dynamic world of human intelligence operations. We're not going to talk about that, and it's not like the movies, though, I'm sure. She began her career in joint counterterrorism operations. She Continued to embrace opportunities for learning and people development through leadership roles across the intelligence community, from small niche operational programs to enterprise-wide software development programs to corporate culture initiatives. Most recently, as a program manager of 65 employees at Leidos, she had the opportunity to establish and develop her program leadership team under the guidance and coaching of the Arbinger Institute, where she now works. She is fluent in French. There'll be no French today, Victoria, because I'm not, and speaks a couple of other languages, though most of her vocabulary revolves around eating. That's a different podcast as well. Victoria, welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So this is a different kind of book for a variety of reasons. And this is a little bit different kind of interview for a number of reasons. Usually, a book at the bottom has a name of a person or a couple of people. And this one, as with the other Arbinger Institute books, it just says by the Arbinger Institute. So I want to just start there. We'll get to the book itself, and I've got a bunch of questions about that. But before we even get there, sort of, what's your connection to the book, and why do we get the pleasure of hearing from you?
Yeah, so I first encountered this book a little over 10 years ago, and it was something that was given to me by a colleague of mine, and he had read it and had this incredible, I mean, he came in, lights in his eyes, the whole thing. He was jazzed up, and I went, cool. I'm not a big reader. So it sat on my desk for the better part of probably 6 weeks. It made a fantastic coaster. And finally I had a long weekend, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot.
It's not exactly a thick one, let's face it.
I mean,
folks.
but it was effective. And so I came.
Well, what I mean is, like, it shouldn't be that heavy of a lift. Let's be clear.
I know, but see, listen, I'm all about making mountains out of molehills, and my leadership journey was a lot of those things gone wrong. But all that to say, in my head, it was a big lift. So I read this book finally over a long weekend, and you were right, it did not take very long at all. And I came in the following workday, and I looked at him, and I was like, "Are you trying to tell me something?" And he was like, "Well, what do you mean?" I was like, "I feel, one, like I have been spectacularly failing everybody that I've been leading. I feel like I'm deficient on more levels than I ever thought possible. And all I want to do is figure out how I can do better by everybody, right? Home life, work life. It was one of those, I don't know if I've ever read a book where I have walked away going, wow, I got a lot I can work on."
We are talking about the book, Leadership and Self-Deception, The Secret to Transforming Relationships and Unleashing Results. If you look at this carefully, which you all can't see, but I can, it's the 4th edition. This book's been around a long time, as you said. Mm-hmm. It's now in its 4th edition. More about that in a second. But before that, like, why do you think? I mean, obviously, it's cool because you had an experience with the book as a reader before you had more involvement in the writing of the next edition or of this edition. I'm curious from your perspective, and even from the Arbinger perspective, why has the book been so successful? 3 million copies. Like, why has it been so successful?
That's an interesting question. And I think, at least from my perspective, I think a lot of times when I read leadership books, it was very prescriptive, right? Do A, do B, do C, then you can expect D as your result. And the problem with that is a lot of times those formulas don't fit into every situation. And the thing that I think that this book invites is us looking at ways that we've been self-deceived. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but ways that we've been self-deceived and how that then can affect our leadership, how that then skews the information that we're taking in, and how that then skews our decision-making progress to ultimately not bring us to achieve the objectives that we want as an organization. And so because of that, this is one of those where I feel like it can apply in any situation, whether you are, a line contributor, brand new in the career, whether you're a seasoned CEO, whether you're, engaging with your family on this content, like all of this can be applied because really this is about relationships between humans, and it's talking about it in that context.
So I want to get to that. We'll talk about self-deception in a second, but I've got one more sort of inside baseball question.
Sure.
Because lots of people have read this book. It's been around a long time. Yeah. And this is the 4th edition, and it's a major rewrite to the book. So why, I won't ask the why a 4th edition because I sort of know that. Sure. But why change it so much? Why the major rewrite?
Well, I mean, I would say that the core principles are the same, right? However, the context in which we wrapped it is more relevant to the workplace now. So, for example, we introduced a female protagonist in this because women are in the workplace, and we look at it from a number of different lenses, right? We needed to have a work culture in the book that was representative of work cultures that we're seeing in the world, in industry. And there was a way that we had explored this topic of self-deception previously that looked at it almost exclusively from the perspective of, I think that I'm better than the people that I work with. Well, the reality of the situation is there's a whole number of facets to the way that we
That's not
might
the only
relate
way we
to
deceive
others.
ourselves.
Absolutely, because I would argue that for me, certainly in the beginning of my career, it was like, I have no business being in this job because I don't know what I'm doing, right? And certainly these people know better than me, and I should just keep quiet, right? So that's a way of me almost viewing myself as less than others. And so we explore that now in this new version because we really do need to be able to look at this from all facets to ensure that everybody's able to see themselves in this book.
So I've waited long enough. I've held you back long enough. Tell us exactly what you guys mean in the book with that phrase. Like, what do you mean by self-deception? And give us, and you gave us one example, but give us another example or two of what it means.
Yeah, so self-deception is really the idea that there is a truth that I am either actively ignoring or have created such a construct that I'm not aware of it. And I'm certainly not admitting that I might be part of the problem. And the example I'll give you in my last position, I was the type of leader who wanted to be seen as somebody who took care of her people. I was the type of leader who looked out for, cared for, basically wrapped them in the loving arms of protection of my leadership. And so because of that, I was doing certain things that ignored what my people actually needed. So for example, my first line leaders would come and say, hey, I've got a question about this HR policy. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do next. And I would say, you know what? I got it. I'll take care of that for you. I'll go handle it. You just keep doing what you need to do. In my head, I was being a really helpful leader.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, great. I'm the best, Kevin. I don't know what you knew, but I was being a really great leader. Now, the problem was, and what I didn't realize until later, was that I'm robbing them of opportunity to learn. I'm robbing them of an opportunity to grow, and I'm taking accountability and responsibility and ownership of that from them. So really, if I'm saying that I'm the type of person who cares about the people she's leading and I care about growing and developing them, I'm acting in a way completely contradictory to what I'm stating I want. And so that's really what self-deception is, right? I'm refusing to acknowledge that I am contributing to this problem, inhibiting my people from growing. And instead, I'm choosing to only focus on the part that serves my self-view. I view myself as the type of person who cares about the people she's leading, and I take care of them. So that's how I do that.
And you just bumped into the next thing I want to talk about, which is how is this connected to our identity, right?
Oh,
You actually framed your example as this is how I see myself, which is part of how you became blinded or this became a blind spot for you. But say a little bit more about the connection between self-deception, where we might be actively trying to avoid what's happening here, and how does that connect with our identity?
Yeah, because really, when I become self-deceived, I adopt what we call an inward mindset. And as part of that, I start to see myself and others in a distorted way. And I create these self-images or these self-views that I believe are characteristic of me. And I feel like the phrase that I hear so often when we're working with clients, when this is kind of like my first inkling of like, maybe we need to explore this, is I'm the type of leader who, right? I'm the type of leader who cares about their people. I'm the type of leader who's fair. I'm the type of leader who's compassionate. I'm the type of leader who holds people to really high expectations. Those can, if we're not careful, become these self-deceived self-views, right? They become characteristic of us, and that then becomes the most important thing to protect. I will search for justification to reinforce this identity of myself that I've created, and I'll do so at the expense of everything else, of my people, of the objectives we're trying to achieve, even of my own happiness, like all of it. It is far more for me to be right than for me to get it right. And that's
Well,
because it's that
it-
identity
it's,
I got to protect.
and it's not, it's all of that. And I think it's actually, I mean, that's the worst part of it, if you will. But I think there's more,
Sure.
there's more to it than that too, because from my perspective, that once we have an identity, whatever we define it as, that's how we view the world, right? However we view the world then impacts our decisions and our behaviors. Just like you said before, I'm the kind of leader that holds people close, takes care of them, keeps them from out of harm's way. So that then I look at everything through the lens of I got to take care of my people, right?
Yep.
As opposed to something that might be broader or different based on the context. And so to me, the other thing that I always think, and so I'd love your thoughts on this, about this whole thing about identity, and the way you described it is fantastic, but I think it can be more pervasive even than that. And that is that if we've done a leadership style assessment, or if we've done a strengths finder, or if we've done a Myers-Briggs or a DISC, like I'm not leaving anybody out here. Like I'm just going, like, and my point is that one, and I'm also not saying there's anything wrong with those things, except they put us on a slippery slope. Well, I am an X, or well, I have these strengths, or and it leads us to potentially to identity, and then can roll us down this hill that you've just described. Agree, disagree?
No, I
Comments?
think you're spot on, because I think anytime, ultimately, like we talk about it in that any data can be consumed for one of two purposes, right? Well, there's more than two purposes, but for the sake of this argument, right? One is this is information that I can use to be part of a larger aggregate of information that will help shape a decision. Or this is information that I'm going to take and I will part and parcel to feed the justification that I need in order to serve my purpose, right? So in the examples that you were talking about with the personality assessments, it's like, okay, well, I'm a D in the DISC assessment. Therefore, that's why I come across really harsh, right? I'm really
I really
dominant.
don't think you are, by the way. I just as an aside, I do
No,
not believe that is your
but
primary.
for example, right, it's
style.
very easy to fall back on that as justification for why I behave the way that I do, when instead it's a data point that might inform our way of processing information, but it doesn't provide the justification for why we behave the way that we do. And the why, though, I mean, really, if you get down to it, why we respond to others in the way that we do, because that's really what this is about, right? It's the way that we are interacting and the relationships that we're forming, because we are in relationship to everyone, whether we want to be or not, right? Even the people that are, working at the grocery store, working at the gas station, we are in relationship with them.
So it's interesting because if you're watching, you will note that I actually have that to put on the screen as well. So, and I said the relationship to relationships, because everything we've been talking about so far, I mean, you just opened that door, but okay, leadership and self-deception. But then you say, here's the secret to transforming relationships. So how do we take this thing that we do to ourselves to self-deceive ourselves, even if it's not intentional? How is that connected to our ability to have the kinds of working relationships we need to be successful?
Yeah, I think the start of all of it, and I think the thing where I struggled most, if I'm being honest, in terms of this journey, because we talk a lot about, being outward or seeing others as people, right? Versus being inward and self-deceived, almost as a binary state. But the reality is it's far more like a slide rule, right? Because I can be all over the map. But so all that to say,
Even
when I
within the
started
same
this,
day.
oh, in the same conversation, Kevin, I could be inward and outward in the same conversation. I've done it because I'm just that talented at being inward. But all that to say, when I started this process of becoming more aware of my own self-deception and my own inward tendencies, a lot of what I was trying to work through is like, okay, how do I even start that process? Like, how do I even start trying to break down this image of myself that I've constructed? And a lot of it's as simple as getting curious. And it's just, how have I made things harder? That was the question I had to ask my leaders. And that was how I figured out, by me taking on these HR duties that they were asking about, I was making their career development harder. And so it was just, how am I making things harder, or how have I been part of the problem, and how can I help? Right? None of that. And I think a lot of times the misconception is that in order to be in relationship with others and productive relationship, it requires this deep vulnerability. And I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think that there's an element to which vulnerability can help, but asking, how have I been a problem, or how have I been unhelpful, and how can I be more helpful in the future? Like that's really concrete, and it's just curious. Because
Yeah,
in that,
yeah. But let's be honest. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't disagree with you, and yet there's a level of vulnerability that's required to even be willing to ask that question, right? To say, I don't know what they're going to say, and I don't know if I'm going to like what their answer to that is, right? I mean, there's 30 reasons why
Sure.
as leaders we don't ask for feedback. As humans, we don't ask for feedback. You've given us a couple of really very specific questions we could use that are
Mhm.
fundamentally a way to get feedback to help us see what we can't see,
Right.
right? Or to see, to your other point, to see the results of the choices that we've made,
Mhm.
even if that wasn't our intention, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, at the heart of this whole conversation.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we can say, and in times working with leaders long before you were doing that, because it's clear to me that you're younger than me. I can tell you that there was a time when I was doing this work when no one used the word vulnerability,
Mm,
right, or being vulnerable.
right.
I mean, it didn't mean that it didn't matter then, but we didn't think about it that way. So I hear your point that maybe the vulnerability word gets overplayed a little, but we have to be aware that for a lot of people that are listening, just asking that question, what am I doing that's making it harder? What am I doing that's getting in your way? What am I doing that is making things difficult for you? Like, we have to be willing to listen to that answer, and many people aren't.
That's fair. I mean, and I think that there's a way that you can almost even bring it up a level, right? Like, how does somebody in my role make your job harder? Right? It's not about me then at that point. Or even you could take it even a step further back. Maybe it's no longer about that relation itself, but it's just getting curious about the other person. Like, what are you trying to work on? Like, what are the things getting in your way? What are the challenges that you're experiencing? What are you hoping to accomplish? What are those future goals that you have? Right? Because in that, inherently, you're going to start to see the humanity of that other person, which will exactly start to break down some of that self-deception.
Yeah, we are talking with Victoria Trammel, one of the folks involved in the writing of and the teaching of the book Leadership and Self-Deception, now in its 4th edition. And so we've talked about a number of these things. Why, and you said this at the beginning, to which I would agree, that we could apply these ideas in any part of our lives. Why is it so specifically important for us to understand this when we're leaders?
The ripple effect of leadership, I think, is often not, I don't know if it's necessarily underplayed, but I think that sometimes we don't even necessarily grasp how much influence and impact we have as leaders. I think it can be generational. Like, I think back to talking to my dad about leaders that he had that shaped the way that he led his team, that then shaped the way that I became a leader of my own right. Like, it is tremendous the impact that we have, and specifically around the future, right? A lot of times we can get bogged down in what I would like to call tactical leadership, right? How do we get these objectives done in this frame for this week, for this whatever? And we miss the possibilities when we develop the capacity in others, right? When we when we become leaders of leaders and we're able to do this, like, it's just, I think that's the part that always sits so deep when I think about the work that we do at the Arbinger Institute, is that this has long lasting impact, and it can transform the way that entire organizations function. I mean, we're talking culture shifts on a tremendous level that has lasting impact.
So, other than, of course, the short answer to this is, Kevin, everyone should buy a copy of the book. Like, I
Yes,
understand that.
facts.
But beyond that, my question would be, based on the stuff we've been talking about, Victoria, what advice would you have to someone who's listening to us right now in terms of what they should do first?
I think, we talk a lot about mindset at the Arbinger Institute and how it is at the core of everything when we talk any kind of change, behavior change, culture change, all of anything we want to see. When we want to see a different result, mindset is at its foundation. And the best thing we can do is start to see people. And so if that first step is seeing others as people who have needs, objectives, and challenges, who matter like I matter, getting curious about them, like it is, I don't want to make it sound like it's, magical fairy dust that we sprinkle over and all of a sudden everything's rainbow and sunshine, but there is tremendous power in the understanding of another human being's objectives and knowing what the headwinds and tailwinds that they're facing, the objectives that they're trying to achieve, the challenges that they're running into. Getting curious about that, I would say, would be step one. Just get curious.
It's a really good place to start. I have to say that on that specific note, that a group that I was with this week, one of the questions they asked, you've been asked this question, I've been asked this question 100 times, like, how do I manage up, Kevin? I don't even love the phrase, but that's what everyone uses, so we'll say that, right? How do I manage up? In other words, how do I influence without positional power? Fundamentally, is the question. And my answer is exactly what you just said. Like, can you understand their perspective? Can you understand what their goals and objectives are? If you can do those things, or when you do those things, you set yourself up to be far more influential with them, because you can tie what you want to talk about. You can tie your concerns. You can tie your ideas to their objectives, which is like opening the magic door, if you will.
Absolutely. Because thinking as a leader, when I've had my direct reports come to me and say, hey, I know this is a really big thing that you're working on right now, and I think that this might be helpful for you to achieve your objective.
And you're all ears.
I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Like, absolutely. Game on. Let's go. Let's do this. It's just, it's such a great feeling. And I think, absolutely, to your point, it's a huge way to wield influence.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
I don't know. I think, you pointed everybody to our book, which I think is a great, great way to do it. But
that's why we're here at some level, right? So
yeah, well, absolutely. But I think, a lot of times I get asked, like, what's my greatest takeaway in working with clients and having been able to do this work and be a practitioner of it for, 11 years at this point. And I think that what I have seen and what I have experienced is that even the most genuine altruistic motivations can still be shrouded in self-deception. It does not mean that you have to be a terrible, toxic leader to be self-deceived.
Yeah. And oftentimes, even when our intent is pure, there are unintended consequences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to shift gears before we finish, and I'm going to ask you, Victoria, what you do for fun.
So for fun,
it must be involved food. That's what you said to start with.
Oh, so. Absolutely. It does. Come on. We're a big food family, and it's not that we necessarily need the, 5-star Michelin restaurants. We like to find like little hole in the wall restaurants and kind of get in with the locals wherever we're going, whether it's, in the US or overseas. That's kind of our favorite way to experience the local culture, is to just go find some little hole in the wall and get to know the people. My husband is a practitioner of this work without having been an expert in this work, because he can get curious about people in the most genuine, natural ways. Like, it's great to watch. And so because of that, we do a lot of eating. That's our mechanism for getting curious about people. And then we do a lot on the music front in our household. So dance, music, concerts, all kinds of stuff.
Perfect. The only thing you knew for sure I would ask you is this question: what are you reading these days? And of course I didn't know at the time that you're gonna say, well, I didn't used to ever read, so I don't know.
I did it. I've gotten better. As I've gotten older, I've gotten better. It was always tied too much to college and like forced reading in my brain, but I've gotten a lot better about it. I'm actually getting ready to start a book called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And it was recommended to me by one of my colleagues at Arbinger because it's really looking at this in the context of parenting and how we can look at children as people and what the effect is in terms of how they operate in society. So I'm excited to get started on it because I think it'll be really interesting to look at it through that context. As a mom, I'm all ears for ideas on parenting.
Hunt, gather, parent. All of the details for that will be in the show notes, as well as all the details about leadership and self-deception, the 4th edition, revised and updated. Here it is. Where do you want to point people, Victoria? Where can people learn more about you, about the Institute, about the work? Where do you want to point people?
Yeah, so arbinger.com is a great place to start. Our website, we've got all of our information on there in terms of the research that we've done regarding this topic, the different public events that we have, the solutions, all that kind of stuff where you can find us. And then LinkedIn is another great option. The Arbinger Institute is on LinkedIn, and we've got a lot of content flowing through there about different topics we've been discussing and different, forums we've been holding, all kinds of good stuff.
Arbinger.com or Arbinger Institute on LinkedIn. Victoria, before we go, I've got a question I want to ask everybody else. It's the question I ask you all every single week, and it's simply this. Now what? What action will you take as a result of having been here? What idea did you hear that you will now translate into an action? What action will you take as a result of being here? Because let's face it, if you thought, oh, this was interesting, or I'm curious about that, but you don't do anything more than that. If you just finish the podcast and finish your exercise and don't take anything else from it, then it's limited in its value. On the other hand, if you ask yourself that question, now what? What am I going to do with what I just heard? If you do that, you'll get far more from this than you would otherwise. I hope you'll do that. And I hope you'll be back with us again next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which means you need to come back, which means if you're not, you need to subscribe wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Make sure you come back. And if you love this as much as I think you did, hope you'll invite someone else to listen to this episode as well. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.